Warning: the following podcast might be too truthful for most liberals. Listener discretion is therefore advised. Welcome to the Tea Party Power Hour. My name is Mark Gallar. I'll be your host as we interview Barry Hinkley. He is the great-grandson, actually, we need to put about 8 greats in there, of Colonel James Barrett, the commander of the Minutemen of Concord, who famously greeted the British on April 19, 1775 at the Old North Bridge. He was a senatorial candidate back in 2012, and he and a group of his high school buddies have done something really interesting. They have created what they're calling the ReDeclaration of Independence. Barry, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Mark.
Tell me about this ReDeclaration of Independence that you and your friends have put together.
Well, I think like many Americans, we're just regular old frustrated people and really disenfranchised with our government. And it became increasingly obvious to us that our government was acting more and more like royalty and treating us as indentured servants and, second, third, fourth tier subjects. Mm-hmm. And we wanted to do something. And I've been involved in what they call the cause. And I'm sure your audience is probably familiar with the word cause, but the cause was what all the pre-revolutionaries before the first Revolutionary War called it, because they didn't know it was going to be a revolutionary war. They all called it the cause. So there's a great book on it if you want to look it up and read about it, called The Cause. And so I've been involved in the cause for quite a while, and we're all frustrated. And we knew we needed to do something to bring like-minded and like-frustrated patriots together, because sadly, our representatives in Washington have become so entrenched and so powerful and career politicians that they've forgotten us. And so we need to get their attention, and we're hoping we can get millions of patriots to sign on and get our representatives to start working for us rather than themselves.
It's been that way for a long time, unfortunately, but this is a great idea. I'd like to take some of the issues that you guys have brought up one by one and go over them and let you kind of expand on it. Right now, the U.S. has $34 trillion in debt. And as is pointed out, if you tried to count to $1 trillion, it would take 32,000 years. Most people have no concept of what a trillion is, and yet we are $34 trillion in debt. Our elected representatives are playing with it like it's monopoly money. Talk to me about how the ReDeclaration of Independence views the debt and what would be done about it.
Well, first of all, the way we view it is the only good news is our debt is $34 trillion. That's sadly the good news. The bad news is we have unfunded liabilities. In other words, promises our politicians have made to citizens that are, by some estimates, $200 trillion. And I'm talking about the unfunded liabilities, the money that is not in Social Security that should be there, the money that is not in Medicare that should be there and has promised to be there, but they've gone and spent or they've misappropriated. So we have massive deficit and unfunded liability problems. People talk about the short-term debt, which is $34 trillion. I got involved in the cause when we were creeping up on 10 because I thought that was crazy. So, the first two tenets deal with balanced budget and also limiting the size of the federal government as how much it can collect. And we fixed that number at 20% of GDP, and we didn't pull that out of thin air. Lots of research went into that. And our federal government has never been able to collect more than about 21% of GDP, even when marginal tax rates were 90% under Eisenhower to pay back World War II. So that's about how much citizens will cough up before they either stop working or stop paying. So why don't they be smart for a change and back into the number that they know they can't exceed and simplify the tax code and live within their means? That's the focus of the first two tenets. Limiting the collections and any excess either being used to pay down debt or put in the treasury for rainy day. And the second tenet addresses a balanced budget amendment. But not only that, but getting a budget done every year by October 1st, which is the federal government's own deadline, which they haven't done since 1996. They have not met their own deadline. And they don't get too happy with us when we miss our deadline of April 15th, do they, Mark?
No, no, they don't like that at all.
No. So they can't meet their own, and they haven't since '96. And so we say, you know what? If you can't meet that deadline to do your job, which is to pass a budget and hopefully a balanced one, because we're asking for that too, then you don't get paid.
I think that's a very reasonable thing to suggest. Let's talk about the Laffer curve for a minute and how this plays into taxes. If you subscribe to the Laffer curve, you believe that by lowering taxes, you actually generate more government revenue. The Democrats have it the other way around. They think the way you bring in more government revenue is to increase taxes. What does your organization or your group say about taxation?
Well, we're pragmatists, and sadly, in a world that seems to be ruled by more emotion, uh, oftentimes than pragmatism, we're sometimes out of favor or overlooked. But the reality is, it works when you cut regulations on the productive side of the economy. And the productive side of the economy drives everything. There are no nonprofits, there are no government offices or services unless you have Americans that produce. If you make it easier for Americans, the most productive group of people in modern history, to produce, then they will produce more. And when they produce more, be back into that 20% number, which over and over again is the case, the government will raise more money. But the government has to do its part. It has to cut. And I hear all these proposals. And one thing that really, really stood out to me when I was watching Jesse Waters maybe a week ago, when he popped up a survey that said 84% of elites are happy with Biden's policies. Well, that should tell you everything. The rich are getting richer and we're getting poorer, and the government's taking more and more of our cash. And of course, if you make it easier on us for it to work, we will work more. But if you punish it more, we'll work less and the government will collect less. So big fan of our Laffer and the Laffer curve, if that makes sense.
It does. And one of the things you brought up there was emotion. And you talked about emotion, and that leads us right into the next topic I wanted to discuss, and that is wokeism. I had Professor Bruce Fleming of the Naval Academy on a few weeks ago, and he was
Yeah.
just discussing how wokeism has even penetrated the American service academies, including the Naval Academy. And he discussed how it was destroying these young midshipmen at the Naval Academy. And with that in mind, your group, I know, feels that wokeism is destroying the military, in addition to the fact that they're already poisoning the minds of future young officers. Talk to me about how wokeism is destroying the military.
Well, first, we took a look at what's been happening and the attack of wokeism on America. This is a plan by the Marxists, leftists, and fascists, we believe. Sometimes guise themselves as socialists, just to make them sound friendly. But first, they attacked the education system and they took it over. Then they attacked the government and they took it over. And then they attacked corporations. And you see what's happened in the corporate woke boardrooms. And certainly saw the reverb after BLM when things got super woke. And so they claimed victory in those three areas. And the last stop was the military. They knew if they took over the military and made it woke, they'd not have any resistance. And they are endeavoring to do that. You can see it now. So the 12th tenant, I worked with a bunch of guys from the Naval Academy on this one. And it addresses making sure that our military reverts to a meritocracy, and we don't judge success in the military by quotas or preferences, which is just a cover for wokeism. So it's a big deal, and we have to get our military back to a meritocracy because it's directly affecting the performance of our military, but also the recruiting shortfalls, the massive recruiting shortfalls that we're seeing, not only in new recruits, but multi-generational recruits. Like, family members are not going into the military because of what they're seeing with their fathers and grandfathers.
I can't say that I blame them. And I just get so frustrated with the left and their lack of common sense. I mean, first of all, let's be honest, especially with regard to, the idea that the left wants people who are transsexuals to be in foxholes with everybody else. Oftentimes people who believe that even though they're men, they can have a period, have a baby, nurse a baby, and these types of things. I mean, I'm sorry, if you genuinely have gender dysphoria, then there is treatment for that. And that's fine. I mean, I know people who I actually knew someone who lived that lifestyle. But let's not go crazy with this. Shove it down everyone's throats. Put drag queens in the kindergarten classrooms and do some of the things that they're doing. And I don't see how having a military that embraces wokeism could do anything but bring the quality of the military down. It just doesn't make any sense that it would do anything but that.
Well, maybe that's their goal.
Well,
it's a lot easier to control a weak military, isn't it, than a strong one?
Yeah, same thing with society. Same thing with society in general. Went out to dinner the other night, and the guy waiting on us had extremely long, glittery fingernails. And I just thought, oh my goodness, what is the world coming to? I live in a college town. I'm where Texas A&M is located in College Station, Texas, and it's just amazing to see what's gone on with the kids. I was a student at A&M back in the 80s, and now you see how guys are behaving and how they talk and how they sound and how they trim their fingernails, frankly. And it just seems like the whole world has gone crazy. This was at one time, Barry, one of the most conservative universities in the United States. And of course, the ROTC program here is renowned. During World War II, Texas A&M sent more officers to World War II than the Naval Academy and West Point combined. So there's a long, rich military history here. And somehow we've gone from that military background to guys who want to use fingernail polish. And I just don't understand how all of this has happened. I mean, people are believing crazy things. Saw a girl on YouTube one night saying that if you didn't agree that there were over 600 genders, you were denying science. So that's where things have gone with the kids, and it's not just destroying the military; it's destroying everything. Wokeism destroys everything it touches, in my opinion. But let me jump on to your next subject, and that is why term limits are so critical. I mean, part of that seems obvious, but I want you to expand on that for us.
This one's really important, and you got to kind of think beyond the time and think about what you're really doing when you allow someone. And this, sadly, our founders didn't realize that that public servants would be this selfish. And I'm not talking about people that choose public service and a career in the government. I'm talking about people that run for public office. They never thought that people would lay down a profession and make it a profession.
Right.
They thought you would work on the farm, you'd work, in your family business, whatever it was, and you went and served, and then you went back and you brought that expertise to Washington to share your knowledge with the country. So we believe that limiting it to 12 years makes a really important point, because if you even did it to 18, 3 Senate terms, you could make a career out of that. We believe by limiting it to 12 years, it affects the type of person and personality you attract. If you tell someone they can only serve 12 years, either in House or Senate combined, not both, not 12 and 12, right? That's it, the combination. So you could do 1 Senate term and 3 House terms or 2 Senate terms, something like that. That attracts someone that is there for the public service element of it to the largest degree possible. If you allow them to do 18 or a career unlimited as it is today, then you attract a personality type that will make it a career, because they have a 98% reelection rate. They have completely cooked the system. They raise money using their $6 million a year budget, office budget, to fly around and do fundraisers, open post offices that are really a cover story for a fundraiser, and, burn, public money to get reelected. And that person, when you allow someone that gets paid $175,000 a year to transact in trillions, and they're that close to it for 2, 3, 4 decades, they become corrupt. And look at Joe Biden. I think he's a great example of it. Look at Nancy Pelosi. These people are worth hundreds of millions. Well, I don't know, who knows what Joe's worth and where his money is. But, Nancy on paper is worth hundreds of millions. And if you read the book, Throw Them All Out, done by the Hoover Institute, you read about a lot of her corruption. we are attracting the wrong kind of people. They're there for self-service. So limiting the term 12 years, you get someone that's interested in public service. And then they have to, by default, have another career.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And you mentioned the Bidens. I mean, the Bidens, people always talk about, well, the Trumps have money. Why don't you have a problem with that? You're being a hypocrite. No, the Trumps had money before Donald Trump went into politics. In the
Well, he's
case,
got less now.
yeah,
He's the only guy in history that left poor when he showed up.
absolutely, that's correct. And I think he almost immediately went down by $500 million in terms of his net worth. And but in the case of the Trumps, and I always like to point this out to liberals who don't grasp the obvious, we know what business the Trumps are in. So when they say last year the Trumps made X amount of money, yeah, they had real estate and clothing and Lord knows how many other businesses. They're in countries all over the world. For the Bidens, the politics, that is their business, peddling influence. And and then they come up with some lame excuse, well, why did Joe Biden's sister-in-law wire him $40,000 right after she received a payment from overseas? Oh, that was a loan repayment. Well, show us where you made the loan in the first place. Silence, crickets. I mean, that is their business, selling influence globally. Biden's brother and his son, Hunter, were the international bagmen who went around collecting the money. And it's obvious that what these people bought from the Bidens was, influence with the vice president. In fact, I think if we go back to Joe Biden's vice presidential term, we know now that was a time that his family was receiving a lot of money from China for doing nothing. And we also know that the New York Times wrote an article about how Vice President Biden was soft on China. Gee, money from China, soft on China? I'm sure it's just a coincidence. But you're exactly right. That type of making a career out of politics does lead to corruption. I mean, I think it takes a while before they become that corrupt. I'd like to think some of them are at least genuine when they run for office. Now, one of the things
they don't have much to sell in the beginning, right? Because they don't have any power.
Exactly.
Right. And that's the whole beauty of limiting the term. You don't have much to sell if you're a freshman. And you can do some little domestic deals here and there, and that's how they climb the ladder. The domestic favors. I ran for U.S. Senate in Rhode Island against Sheldon Whitehouse. And Rhode Island is there's a reason there's a massive podcast called Crime Town named after the state. There was a national sensation. The place is incredibly corrupt. And I saw it front row how it works. And the longer they're there, the more access points they have to trade on their influence. And they start small, they start locally, they start domestically, and they climb the ladder. And they see it as a 30, 40-year career where they're not going to lose their job because they've got too much power of incumbency. Mm-hmm. And they completely have traded away our country and our liberty.
Well, we've certainly seen that with a lot of the legislation that has done nothing other than send jobs overseas. I mean, Trump is the first guy I've ever seen that made a genuine effort to get jobs back and to cut the trade. Go ahead.
I can echo that. I mean, I grew up in a manufacturing family. I watched it starting to happen in the 70s, with Asia, Taiwan, Japan, Taiwan. And then, of course, when Nixon opened up China in 72, it got more and more aggressive. And then the coup de grace came when Clinton in 92 gave China most favored nation status. I mean, I would look for the check on the backside of that deal because that really crushed manufacturing. Giant sucking sound. And that's why we have one of our tenets in here is to enact through trade legislation laws that foreign producers wishing to sell their products in America abide by the same laws and regulations heaped on American producers. We demand a level playing field for American workers and producers. I mean, what's so hard about that?
I don't know. At one point, this part of Texas was represented by a guy named Bill Flores, and I argued with one of his aides until I was blue in the face that shipping jobs overseas was not a good deal and that a large trade deficit with China was not good for America. And this guy tried to tell me that the trade deficit was actually a benefit to America. And he meant it. I mean, the argument actually became quite heated, to be honest. And
well, it's a benefit to the people that were bankrolling him because it has successfully converted us to a debt-based, finance-based economy, not a production-based economy. And the rich are getting super rich in Washington and other finance hubs, but we're not making stuff anymore. Certainly not enough.
As I think about the next subject, education, I think of all the ridiculous stories that we've seen coming out of schools in America. There was, and some of my listeners have heard me say this before, but there was one kid who wore a T-shirt to school that had the American flag on it, and he was told to either turn his shirt inside out or go home and change. I mean, because they said that the flag on his shirt might offend somebody. This is the United States of America, and a kid's being told, hey, that flag on your shirt, ooh, you might upset someone. We don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. You need to turn that inside out, or, if you want, we'll let you go home and put on another shirt. We've seen incidents all over America where kids have been suspended from school for saying there are only two genders, male and female. And apparently that's so radical, if you dare say that in a public school, and in some cases a private school, you will be sent home, and suffer a multiple day suspension. So you have to ask, what in the hell is going on with American schools when everything they do seems to be a violation of common sense? And this all starts with the Department of Education. And I know your group has some ideas as to how we need to fix that. So I'll let you tell us about it.
Well, I think it starts with the demoralization of the great teachers, because there's a lot of great teachers out there in a really broken, bad system. People that when we've all met them, we've all known them growing up, we had them. I went to public school for most of my life. And so those teachers stuck in a horrible system get demoralized because they're not incentivized. There's no great incentives to be a great teacher. You're paid the same as the person that no shows. I would talk to these teachers and they would, like a fourth grade teacher, and say there was a failing third grade teacher, the year before her, and the failing third grade teacher couldn't get fired because of the union rules and would call in sick every single day. It was a fake. And then those kids would have substitute teachers every day, and they would be a train wreck when they were handed off to fourth grade because the kids had no consistency. But you had these teachers that were, just gaming the system. So that's part of it, and that's just one example of the massive demoralization of great teachers stuck in a broken system. But then once you have the good teachers demoralized, you have the bad actors, the communists and socialists and the Marxists that have penetrated. Everyone knows the Marxism game is to penetrate the education system. I mean, Lenin said, give me 4 years, give me your kid for 4 years in their mind. And so, when the bad actors take over, they realize they have a really long leash to do what they want to do because of, they can't get fired or whatever. Then they start doing it. And the good teachers are demoralized and are just, head down. And next thing you know, you have this multi-trillion-dollar failure called the Department of Education that is spending in the top 3 or 4 per capita per student in the world, 2 or 3, and producing bottom 30 results. And then you have an uneducated population that can't make great decisions at the voting booth and certainly don't know how to make anything anymore.
It's really sad to see what's happened with the young people. I was discussing the immigration problem, the border problem, with a young lady who is not that long out of college. And she said, well, it's ridiculous to have any type of immigration laws at all because, 1,000 years ago, we didn't have immigration laws. If you wanted to go somewhere, you just went. And I just had to stop and think for a second. Oh my gosh, how do you even combat that without insulting the person? There were a lot of things that went on.
Well, I think you have to. You could just
go ahead.
You can insult them. You can insult them with the facts. The reality was managing 8 billion people on a planet is incredibly difficult. It takes things like law and order.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
you just can't have it. When we lived in tribes that maxed out at 212 people, and there was plenty of land, you could go where you wanted to go as long as you could, I guess, provide for yourself and your crew or your clan. But we're a large country in a large world with billions of people spread around and hundreds of millions here. That takes structure, it takes rules, it takes order, and when that breaks down, society breaks down.
Name one.
How do you govern the people? How do you govern the people that the American citizens that are asked to live by one strict set of rules with, the IRS breathing down their neck and every other, taxation and regulation and running a business and all this, and then you let people break the law when the first thing they do is walk across our border, and their introduction is to America. Welcome, break the law, and we'll buy you a ticket to go wherever you want. Like, how do you get that person to conform to law and order if their first action is to break the law?
You don't. And I don't know why young people, well, I guess I do. I think they've been brainwashed for a while. When Ted Cruz was on a few weeks ago, one of the things he talked about was the liberals announcing that they were going to have a long, slow march through the institutions. And one of those institutions, undoubtedly education. And let's give them credit. They've been successful at it. They've dumbed down education where many of our young people can't think logically. I know someone who's a young person who voted for Biden. And I said, well, I assume you're a hardcore Democrat. And they said, no, I'm a libertarian. And I just had to pause. I mean, I said, so basically you're for a government that's hands off and few rules and regulations as possible. And they said, oh, yeah, absolutely. And I said, so you voted for the party that likes to manage life down to the nth degree. And there's this long pause. Well, it's really more about not liking Trump. Well, what do you not like about Trump? Well, his response to the pandemic wasn't strong enough or fast enough. Okay, have you seen the videos of all the liberal Democrats saying that everything he was doing was unnecessary and it was racist and xenophobic, and the pandemic was going to be no big deal? Come to New York, come to California, come to Chinatown. And they're like, no, I didn't see that. And I go, well, then you need to question your news sources. But the young people, I have to say, I guess when you give yourself 100 years or so to do something, and you're very serious about that goal, people can get it done. And there has been a long, slow march through the institutions. And I think the saddest place to see that is in the world of academics. It's just absolutely horrible. So let me ask you this. How do we get that back? I know the Department of Education needs to go, but you've got kids that have been brainwashed since the drag queen showed up in kindergarten class. They've been brainwashed by their teachers, in grade school and junior high school. Then they get to college and they're brainwashed even more. I mean, yeah, we could turn things off at the Department of Education, but we've got a few generations of kids who didn't learn very much in school, uh, except maybe how to use a computer. And they actually believe all this wokeism nonsense.
Well, the left has had a very good plan. I hate to say it, but they've had a very good, simple plan. And their plan is three parts. It's noble cause. And so they have two noble causes that they use interchangeably, depending on who they're addressing. Let's talk about kids, for example. They use global warming as one, and they just hit them really hard on that. Like, global warming, Earth is getting ruined, and every kid responds to that. And then they have a plan, right? So first step, noble cause. Sometimes noble cause, they'll flip in DEI or wokeism, that kind of stuff, equity. Mm-hmm. And then there's the plan, which is socialization of America, and then there's a villain. And Trump became the perfect villain for them because they have the compliant press. I mean, we all know that 96% of the press is on the other team, and we've all seen the mashups of them all repeating the exact same talking points that they get from the Washington Press Club every morning at 4 a.m., which may or may not come from the CIA. And so, they actually handle this over and over again. And Trump is this villain. And then you have all these kids that are not taught to be pragmatic thinkers. They're taught to be emotional thinkers. And Trump is such a great villain, and the press has done such a great job demonizing him that he's actually contagious. So if you like him, you're bad too. You're a villain as well. And they've got so we have to address education. We have to teach our kids to be logical, pragmatic thinkers. And the way to do that is to get the federal government out of it, because it can't be trusted. The Department of Education, which was started by Jimmy Carter, is a massive failure. There's been no movement, and that, in fact, outcomes are worse, and we spent trillions of dollars on it. And we need to return the power to the localities and states, right back to our founding fathers' design of a federal republic, where the power lies in the states. And you will see the states, when they're clawing back what power they can and finances they can, they're enacting school choice, which allows the market and it will incentivize brilliant instructors and teachers to come forward and create new ways of learning, because we do have to break out of this ancient Germanic cycle of educational calendar of this based on farming, and this teach kids pragmatically to become producers and allow them to self-actualize and teach to their strengths. And I don't believe the federal government can do that from Washington, D.C. And I think they've proven us right that they're a giant failure.
Well, I think getting the top of Maslow's hierarchy of needs is a good goal that we should all shoot for. And very few of these kids are self-actualized. I mean, uh, went to a wedding where most of the attendees were in their very early 30s, and none of them could put their phones down. They just all played video games at their table. So I mean, this whole thing is getting really weird. But the indoctrination starts early. I remember when global warming was in the early stages, or at least pushing global warming was in the early stages. They had television commercials, where they were telling kids Santa's not going to be able to come this year because there's not enough snow for his sleigh to take off. And at one of the international,
Oh my
go
God.
ahead.
No, I just
Oh yeah, it's crazy.
I'm not surprised, sadly.
Yeah, I mean, you tell kids something like that, and then I remember it might have been at the Copenhagen conference on climate change. They had this girl running from a flood, and she's hanging on to a tree limb as the flood caused by global warming goes underneath her. And then there was Gillian Anderson in the which show was she on, the X Files, I guess, and she did a commercial where they were asking the kids in the class if they thought they could do anything to combat global warming. And the two kids who said no, they didn't think they could do anything. She looked down at all these buttons and figured out which two were associated with their seats, pressed this button. There was an explosion. And I mean, this was disgusting. There were huge slabs of bloody meat that came down and landed on those kids' desks, representing the kids being blown up for not wanting to do anything about global warming. So when you look at that and you hear that in Great Britain, that child psychologists were seeing a huge uptick in business because of kids who were terrified of global warming, it's not too surprising, because they're grabbing these kids early because they know adults aren't going to buy into this crap. I'm 60 years old. When I was a little kid in the 70s, they used to have a news show on Saturdays for kids. And at that time, they were saying that we were headed into another ice age. And I remember telling my mom,
Yeah.
"Mom, I'm going to need a bigger coat." and
Yeah.
and now it's just the opposite. In fact, if you go back 100 years and look at what the scientific community was predicting, first it was global cooling, then it was global warming, then it was global cooling, then it was global warming. They have flip flopped on that numerous times. But the important thing here, the takeaway here, is that they were scaring the hell out of America's youth, and that's the problem we have, is that these kids have been brainwashed since day one, and it's hard to convince people that they're wrong. And one of the things, and my listeners are probably getting sick of hearing me say this, but I like to do what I call the blank paper test, or the carte blanche test. I will, when someone says something like, a person says, well, Trump's a horrible person, he's a dictator, whatever, whatever. I hand them a piece of paper and I say, name one thing Trump wanted to do, or one policy that came through Donald Trump that was dictatorial in nature. And they'll sit there and sit there, and then finally they'll go, well, I can't think of anything, but it's really more his personality. And he kind of has the personality of a dictator. Oh, okay. And I had a very educated woman. In fact, she was a school principal for, oh gosh, 25 years, tell me that she was going to go to her grave believing that, despite what the Mueller report said, that the only reason Trump was able to defeat Hillary Clinton was because he colluded with Russia. Did the same thing. I said, well, it works for global warming. Let's see how it works for this. Gave her a sheet of paper. I said, write down every fact you can think of that would suggest Donald Trump colluded with Russia in 2016. And again, sitting there staring at the paper for a long period of time, and then finally saying, Well, I'm not very good at that type thing, but like I said, I'll go to my grave believing that's the only way he could have won. And I'm like, okay, well, to hell with the facts. So that's what we're dealing with. I mean, not only is it a matter of, well, these people think differently than us, but they absolutely refuse to debate. What was it Al Gore said? We have a consensus, on global warming. They don't want to debate and they don't want to have to give up facts. It's all about emotions with them. And that plays very well into, I think, how young people often think. And like you said, you've got to have the noble cause. What could be more noble than saving the planet for future generations? So anyway, I
Well,
agree.
it's a great shiny object, right? If you think about it, like, because the shiny object, this is, they put a lot of intelligence into this. This isn't by accident that they're taking control. They've thought a lot about this, and they've worked with the intelligence state, most likely. I mean, if you study things like Project Mockingbird and the CIA's interaction with the media, for example, Robert Kennedy said something really brilliant in December, and he said, and I kind of consider him, he's a recovered addict, as you know, but he's also a recovered Democrat. And he's so he's seen the era, how that party has left the working. That used to be the party of working Americans, and there was some natural tension between producers and workers here, owners and labor in America. But that tension was healthy in many cases. It got unhealthy at times, but anyway, I respect him and what he's doing and speaking truth to power. When he said, if you want to control someone and distract someone, you give them an unsolvable challenge that's completely global and amorphous, like global warming, and especially when you give that to a 10-year-old, right? Yeah. But if you want to solve the problem or solve problems together as a community, you say, let's pick up trash, or let's solve pollution, or let's do a trash pickup in our neighborhood or on the beaches. That's what you do. Or let's address, cleaning up the water in this bay here, because it's got too many parts per billion of plastic, and we can address the landfill, stuff like that. Stuff we did begin to do in the 70s, as you remember, as we rolled through some of these super funds and these cleanups, we did that successfully. But once you give a challenge like global warming to, school kids, sure, we can all do our part, but we got to, it's that old term. You grew up in the 70s too. Remember that bumper sticker, think globally, act locally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's the kind of stuff we need, but that doesn't serve their purpose. You can't brainwash millions of people if they're acting locally and they're interacting with their local governments and authorities, not Washington, D.C. and the globalists.
It's been kind of weird to watch this whole environmental thing. At one point in America, it was called the ecology movement, but then you had all the Vietnam protesters see the Vietnam War, or police action,
undeclared war.
Yeah, come to an end.
CIA war.
Yeah, there you go.
CIA operation.
So they saw that, and suddenly they were out of business. The Vietnam War was over, and a lot of those people jumped into the ecology movement when it became the environmental movement. And it just hasn't been the same since. There was a time when people did focus on as you mentioned in the 70s, cleaning up rivers and streams and all that kind of stuff. But then all of a sudden, the ecology movement gave way to eco-terrorism and things like that. It's just so sad. It's just so sad to see that happen. And again, we're losing generations of young people who can't think, who can't change a tire, who can't make change at a register unless the register does it for them. And it's just so sad to see all of that. But you are a person who takes action. You're not just sitting around waiting for someone else to solve it. You've started this ReDeclaration of Independence, and your goal is how many signatures?
Well, I was at an event with Tucker Carlson in September, and that inspired me to write this. Mm-hmm. And he made a comment off the cuff, and I took him kind of literally. If you can get 10% of the population to go along and stand up with a cause like this, mm-hmm. you can end, quote unquote, in his own words, end this crap right now. And so we'd like to get 15 million people, 15 to 25. 25 would be the goal, mm-hmm. right? Because if George Floyd can get the largest petition in U.S. history, 19 million, I think we can get 25 million patriots to stand up to save the country. So 10% of the adult population, would be 25 million people. 10% of the voting population is about 160 million registered voters. So
Mm-hmm.
that would be 16 million. So happy with 16 million, ecstatic with 25 million.
Tell people how they can sign it.
Well, you go to just ReDeclaration.org, just ReDeclaration.org, and it's right there. You can read it. There's a little intro video from me about, a quick overview. There's another video of some of our earlier politicians that stood for the Constitution, and this is really about reinforcing the values of the Constitution, signing it. And Bill Clinton said something. He was obviously extremely flawed moral character, but he was a smart politician.
Mm-hmm.
He did win. And he did say, politicians will never start the parade, but they will jump out in front with a baton if you do. So the thinking behind the ReDeclaration of Independence is if we get these millions of people to sign, the representatives we get in Washington, D.C. will sign too and be held accountable, because it's really a measuring stick. Because what happens now is these folks go to Washington for 2 or 6 years or whatever the term is, and they come back and they ask for their job back. And they tend to run on a platform to fix what they just broke, it seems to me. So if we can actually use this as a measuring stick and say, how did you do on these 12 points? Did you work on a balanced budget amendment? Did you work on term limits for yourselves? Everyone else has them, right? What have you done to secure the border? What have you done to return educational authority to the states? If you can measure them, then we can hold them accountable. And if they didn't measure up, then you elect their replacement. So the idea is millions of Americans forming this parade, making sure the candidates, and there is a candidate section on ReDeclaration.org where they can sign up that they have signed the ReDeclaration and will be held accountable to it. So, millions of people forcing our representatives to be accountable to constitutional values and get America back to a constitutional republic. We are not a European-style socialistic democracy or whatever they call France these days. We're not that. Our founders took great amount of effort, as you know, Mark, to create us as a republic, because there's a huge difference.
There is a huge difference. I suspect a lot of those young people in certain generations aren't aware of that difference. But
back to the education point.
Yeah, back to that. And Barry, I appreciate so much what you're doing. And more people have to do what you're doing, and that is stand up and do what they can to make some type of a difference. And maybe, as someone put it, I think it was Donnie Trump Jr., was saying that we need to start voting with our dollars. We need to we did a good job with Target and Bud Light, but we need to start voting with our dollars and cause a penalty for, you mentioned wokeism, for companies that buy into this ESG, DEI nonsense. There has to be a penalty for that. We can't just let it go unchecked, and that's what we've done. And it's time for us no longer to be the silent majority. It's time for us to make ourselves known. And I think this ReDeclaration is a great way to do it. Once again, ReDeclaration.org. One of the founders of this site, Barry Hinkley. One day we'll have to have you back and tell us about your family's amazing span of shipbuilding, yacht building, and all that type of stuff. That would be very interesting as well.
Well, thank you, Mark. And I encourage all your listeners to go to ReDeclaration.org and sign, because one of the things I've heard over the years for being in the cause and interacting with a lot of patriots is, very often people will say, Barry, we know it's broken, but what can we do? And this is a simple way to do something, not asking for a check or money or anything else.
Right.
Just asking you to go and sign up and then ask 10 of your friends and family to sign and then forward it on to your representative and ask them to sign as well. That's it. It's that simple.
That is so important to get out there, because I know all the time I get surveys, my email box every day, at least 5 people ask me to fill out a survey. And then you get to that last button and you know what's going to happen. They're going to say, give us 500, 1,000, 1,500. And so you get to the point where you're just tired of filling out surveys, because you know that it's really just a front for asking for money. But here's a case where we're telling you up front, you're not being asked for money. You're just being asked for a signature. It's not going to cost you anything but a few seconds of time. Let America know, let the politicians know how many of us there are. Once again, redeclaration.org. Mr. Hinkley, thank you so much for being on the show today. Thank you for being a person who stands up and makes a difference as the left continues to march on its long, slow march through the institutions. There have to be people who get in their way and say enough is enough. And I see that as being exactly what you're doing here. Once again, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you to all your listeners for tuning in today.
Absolutely.
You've been listening to the Tea Party Power Hour with Mark Gillar.